Yeah, I guess I tend to agree with that, Sangjune. The recycled materials do tend to be viewed as inferior to virgin materials. There's different process methods, different flow sheets to get to the end products. And so it's a challenge, I think, to create new materials from recycled feedstock that, meet the specifications and standards. And there's this perception that the recycled materials will always be inferior. Thus, what kind of discount are you giving me for buying this recycled material? And so I think we in industry have to work really hard to overcome that myth. And obviously, recycling is a sort of catch-all word for taking anything at end of life and turning into something new. But there are obviously different byproducts and products that come out of various recycling streams, even within the lithium-ion space. And so having just a good handle on the specifications, the requirements, et cetera, is the first step just to compete with normal materials, right? Recycled materials competing with normal materials is an important thing. I do believe that, the idea of mandating recycled content for certain, let's say, critical minerals or critical elements would be a very useful policy to help promote and motivate, incentivize more recycling activities. The goal here obviously being, once those elements are extracted from the ground or the water, et cetera, wherever they're coming from, and they've been processed and refined, we should take steps to keep them in the supply chain as much as possible.
Because it is
think we're also gonna dive deeper into the critical mineral later, and maybe we can have Ryan also respond.
Yes, we feel that battery recycling can be a very large contributor to the manufacturing of critical minerals throughout the world, especially within the US. And like we mentioned here at ABTC, we actually have both a battery recycling division, and we also have our own lithium mine and refinery that we're developing here in Reno. So recycling play a very large role in returning critical minerals back to the space. But as the total amount of batteries in the field grows, you still need to add new materials to that loop to fill that loop the first time. So I think both recycling and domestic mineral mining can both play large impacts here.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And I think my second question is, where do you see the biggest disconnect today between the policy goals and the on-the-ground realities for recyclers? So maybe we can begin with Ryan this time.
Yes, I think as we move to a closed loop, it really is, each sector of the closed loop can only move as fast as the other loops. So the demand side from our customers, the production of waste and of like material from our suppliers is all very linked. So it really isn't independent companies operating in different sectors of the closed loop. It is something where you all have to move together to align your throughputs. So when you talk policy, there tends to be policy to speed up or slow down some sectors, whether it's consumer demand or vehicle production or battery production, but you really do have to move all together. And that's why over the past few years, we've been making some, partnerships and alliances with companies in different sectors, with active material manufacturers, with cell manufacturers, with vehicle manufacturers. And you really do all have to accelerate at the same time. And as you do that and you close that loop, you really can own these minerals indefinitely. And it seems more like a kickstarting or jump-starting process to get that whole circular economy to move faster together instead of just trying to get one sector moving and then the other.
Mm-hmm. I think what is missing kind of in the policy is data flow. I mean, to make EPR or policy work, kind of not only the money flow and material flow, but we need data flow to kind of, but I mean, for example, when I worked for plastic recycling project, I knew production data kind of from manufacturer and consumption data and collection data. So there should be kind of some special organization to collect all the data and analyze the market. I mean, is the collection rate low, or the kind of the recycling, percentage of the collected material is low? I mean, we don't know yet. So to make better policy, kind of to encourage the recycling of the batteries, I think, kind of having the data kind of flow system is critical.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's definitely, no mandate for battery traceability. There are a lot of activities that industry is undertaking now for, battery passport is a phrase that's used a lot, but traceability and standards around traceability, those are being developed. And as you're taking, even a somewhat uniform, let's say, in perception, commodity streams such as lithium-ion batteries has a lot of diversity within it. And so, even within the same chemistry of lithium-ion, you get different types of batteries, shapes, sizes. And then when it comes to execution of the recycling bit, dismantling, discharging, the safety of handling, those all come in at different levels as well. You've got stuff that's just off spec, low capacity that comes in for recycling. That's perfectly fine. You've got DDR stuff. It could be damaged or defective, and 100% more dangerous than the other ones, but they may look the same, and it's hard to tell the difference. And so there are definitely hurdles there that can solve through sort of best practices within industry or government standardization, let's say, to help unify the best practices and promulgate that amongst sort of this rapidly growing industry. But it's going to take some time for it to all shake out. And so I think, amongst us here on the panel and probably a lot of people in the audience, we're in the trenches on trying to get the policies to align with these on the ground realities that we're facing.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. There's a lot of complexity to the recycling process, and it's hard for us to just find one policy that can, can solve all the problems. So we have to, figure out what's the best practice like in the real life, and we have to all work on that. So I guess my last question is that, is there any trends in either policy, markets, or technology you think will significantly shape the industry in the coming year? And maybe we can have Sangjune start it this time.
Yeah. I'm kind of trying to find a way to have better kind of recycling supply chain. For example, I call it net cost of battery recycling, which means the value of the battery critical mineral from the battery recycling, and the cost for recycling from logistics, collection, dismantling, and getting critical minerals from black mass. So to reduce the net cost of recycling material is, to maximize the value of EV recycling, which means that there are in a retired EV car, there is some usable spare part in EV car. So not only focus on battery recycling. If we have more holistic approach for EV cars, so our sister company SK Test has IT equipment recycling facilities. So if I can get the spare part from retired EV car, I can validate and sell to the market, which lowers the total cost of EV car operation and also increase value for recycling. And another approach for battery recycling is, as I told you earlier, instead of jelly roll, I'm trying to make a technology with my engineers to separate, sorting the cathode and anode and plastics and metals. So which increase the efficiency of the logistics and recycling in the later part. So kind of my efforts is focused on the kind of to reduce the cost of recycling for the batteries at this moment.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. I mean, obviously, as much pre-processing and sorting that can be done as opposed to just dumping it all into a big smelter or shredder does make that recycling and reclamation process more efficient and more effective. And so there's definitely room for innovation in the recycling process itself, which I think a lot of people just relegate as, well, it's relatively easy, just go do some chemistry on it and make it work. There's a lot of details within that have to be, especially if you're trying to return battery grade materials into the market, that have to be considered before anything can be deployed. And that techno-economic analysis is super important so that you have something that's viable at the end of the day, right? So, that first rule of recycling is that if it's not economic, it goes to landfill. And so we have to make sure that whatever we do, and the balance between the cost of processing, the cost of the feedstock, the price of the byproducts or the products that you're making actually pencil is of paramount importance. I think, more regionally or locally in the US, I think in the coming year, we do see other things that'll sort of make sort of see changes in the way the recycling industry works. A lot of the companies that are recycling are creating critical minerals, and we've seen things like tariffs be applied to, especially China. We've seen that up and down sort of in the last couple of months. But importantly, within that tariff realm, there are things that the tariffs were applied to, and things that they weren't applied to. So there's a bit of an unevenness in the way U.S. policy has approached critical minerals. And I think it has to do with what's currently available, what's currently in production in the U.S. Lithium is really not in production in huge amounts yet. It's coming. And so, that actually was exempt from the reciprocal tariffs. But then other critical materials like cathode active material, for instance, that was exposed to reciprocal tariffs. And so I think going on right now is what's called a Section 232 investigation into trade. And they're looking now, Commerce anyway, is looking into critical minerals and how more targeted trade policies will help promote domestic production activities and support the folks that are just starting to build capacity to strengthen the domestic manufacturing capabilities. And so I think that's going to have a fair impact once the results come out later this fall.
I would add, I think the most important thing going forward is balancing the throughput of the industry again. We've seen a couple of examples of recyclers building plants too big before the industry was ready, which doesn't go well. And as we have dozens of gigafactories operating under construction in the US, if we also don't increase recycling capacity, there will be a glut of material that's shipped outside the US. So again, it's a difficult balance when these facilities take years to design and commission and ramp. But I do think the most important thing is having an aligned throughput within the geographic region of the US or North America. That's what makes us competitive. And if we don't do that, we'll have continuous boom and bust cycles within each different field.
Yeah, it seems there should be some kind of a balancing effort within trade policy to ensure that you have access to global markets when you need it, but at the same time have policies that support domestic activity. So there are things underway that would perhaps impede the flow of materials such as black mass that the U.S. and the EU are considering. So policymakers should think very carefully about what kind of restrictions or controls they put in place for fear of potentially inadvertently hindering the intended outcome, which is a strong domestic manufacturing base.
Mm-hmm. And I totally agree with Ryan that kind of balancing is really important. And kind of to do that, we need data. I mean, again, the government needs to build a system kind of for the industry to see and balancing the kind of feedstock and outputs.
Yeah, definitely. We need to have a more controlled critical mineral policy to build up our supply chain resilience. And now let's maybe turn into the most important policy levers for enabling efficient large-scale recycling which is the collection part of it. And so starting now, this would be more individual questions instead of the round robin questions. So Sangjune, I know personally you touch on EPR, extended producer responsibility. So it's been gaining attention as a way to ensure that end-of-life batteries are properly recovered and fit back into a supply chain. But to make it effective, we need clear policy framework in place, one that supports collection at scale and also align the incentives across producer, recyclers, and consumers. So maybe Sangjun, you can first start off talking about what exactly is EPR and what are the essential elements of well-designed EPR program that supports higher battery recovery and domestic recycling.
Okay, Kelvin. So EPR means extended producer responsibility. So so far, producers of products are only responsible for selling the product. But I mean, under the EPR, they are responsible for collection of retired products and recycle of it. So usually the producers and manufacturers are building a special entity with government and get all the data again for production data, sales data, collection data, recycled material data, and they make policy to balance the market. So the concept is very familiar in EU countries, but not in the US. Even though for lead acid battery, there is some kind of EPR program for the lead acid battery manufacturers, because lead acid battery is so dangerous for the environment. So I think we should build a similar concept of system in the US. It can be a little bit different from battery passport, but the concept is mostly same.
Yeah, Ryan, so from an operator lens, so you are the CEO and CTO and ABTC, do you see policies like EPR affecting the logistic and economics of recycling at scale? And do you think there are any practical challenges for opportunities that policymakers should keep in mind?
Definitely as a factor, and I think it comes down to the carrot or the stick. There is punishing manufacturers if they don't handle material well at the end of life, but we actually see as more the carrot side. Every time we work with a large OEM, one of their first questions is usually, I need to be able to buy the recycled metal back from you. They really want access to the products, which is more the pull side of EPR. So yes, you can make them responsible for end-of-life management, but market forces right now are already dictating that they want access to the products anyway. Really for security of supply, these are some of the only critical minerals made within the US. Depending on what's happening any day with tariffs and subsidies, making these materials in the US actually can be the lowest cost option for a lot of the OEMs. And then it is a much lower environmental impact to make these in the US without all that international shipping and different types of operations. So I think EPR has a place, but right now we're seeing pull side from the OEMs really trying to make sure they own these metals and are able to buy them back.
And Roger, I think looking internationally, do you think there are any models or different forms of EPR or other policy that you think US should be learning from and adapting to our own policy?
Yeah, so I think I may have mentioned this before, but over in the EU, there's obviously a growing battery recycling industry, and a lot of it is being driven by recycled content mandates that they're rolling out over there for battery elements, lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc. So to mirror that here in the US, I think is probably less probable. But if we look at what kind of activity that it could promote, these types of requirements, mandates, which echo in some respects the zero emissions vehicle credits that were useful in promoting EVs and a boon to Tesla. I think they only worked if Tesla was there, obviously. But something like that here in the US might be another way to motivate and grow the recycling ecosystem domestically.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. So I would like to now shift gear a little bit to talk about what happens at the end of life batteries life. Um, I think that's area that we don't often discuss on. So Sangjune, so traditional dismantlers often lacks of the tools and expertise for high voltage battery packs. Uh, what role do you see EV specialized dismantling centers play in improving the safety and efficiency, and what additional benefits do you see they bring compared to conventional operations?
Yes, I think kind of EV specialized dismantling center should add kind of value and kind of reduce risk kind of in the industry, because kind of we have seen many kind of accidents kind of in battery industry, and not all engineers are aware of kind of the risk of batteries and have expertise handling kind of retired batteries. So, if some kind of junk car yard handling battery kind of material in residential area kind of not properly, and there is kind of some thermal runaway there, it's going to be very dangerous and disastrous. So I think having a EV specialized dismantling center, we can collect easily, we can handle the risk more properly, as well as we can collect the batteries, not only batteries, but also spare parts kind of from the process. So to get the spare part from the retired cars, we need specialties and special care kind of to handle on the right way. And if we kind of sell the used car parts to the market, it also reduce the carbon emission and lower the cost of ownership for EV car owners.
And I think this is where DFR can come in as well, designed for recyclability. At the time these packs are made, they should be made where they can have a couple easy things done in the field that can make them much more safer to handle. Things like high voltage disconnects that can break down series cells can be done by relatively untrained individuals in the field. Ways to design them in a modular fashion where they can be broken down in the field, I think would go a long way. We likely don't want, very intense field operations for breaking these materials down with maybe untrained individuals. But I think from the OEM side, a couple DFR steps to go a long way into making things much more safe to handle in the field.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And I think safety is also something that people often overlook and we should pay more attention to. And especially when we receive different types of battery chemistry and they're in different stage of life, and it's gonna be they need to be handled very carefully. So the next section that I wanted to focus on is the market pressures and economic volatility and global competition. So Roger, so global competitors often operate with lower costs due to subsidies, cheaper labor, or looser regulations, putting the US recyclers often at a disadvantage. I think we all kind of touched on that in a previous conversation. what types of policy do you think could help us level the playing field for domestic recyclers? And from your perspective, which policy have the potential to be most effective and which likely would fall short?
Yeah, I mean, ideally the operations are strong on a standalone basis, but we all recognize there is some advantage to some of the foreign players because of the experience and supply chain concentration in those regions. I think what the U.S. has done with production tax credits recently for battery production could be mimicked for battery recycling as well. And so, from the perspective of a critical minerals retention initiative or even maybe a critical materials retention act that could be established to promote recycling for critical material bearing products, not just batteries, but magnets and other key elements in short supply or overwhelmingly sourced from foreign adversaries or higher risk locations around the world. And then, pair that with potentially those recycled content requirements that we see in the EU. Those could be a pretty good sort of carrot stick combo to support, domestic recycling capacity.
Yeah, also wanted to direct the question to Ryan. So in periods when the mineral prices declines, recyclers often face economic strain. And how do you manage this economic volatility in your operations, and what strategies have proven effective in maintaining that resilience?
I think this is again where the strength of a closed loop versus an open loop comes in. Where in an open loop, you really are interacting with the market, whether domestic or abroad. But in a closed loop, if you're buying waste and selling product to the same company, whether it's through a straight tolling model or just through different buy-sell agreements, it really takes a lot of the market prices out of the question because it's more of a net transaction as you're taking their waste and selling them back products. And the more that we get to a closed loop within each region, within the US or North America, we really insulate ourselves from global commodity prices, and it becomes much less important what the rest of the world is doing. I think in the short term, tariffs and subsidies do play a role to help get there. But I think the real answer is to make a self-sustaining closed loop model within the US, and that we aren't as impacted by those changes in global commodity prices.
Yeah, thank you for that valuable insights. I think we are reaching the end of our panel, so wanted to do closing questions and want to leave some time for Q&A in the end. So if you had to choose one perspective, producer, consumer, policymaker, what's the single most important change that needs to happen today to secure an effective US recycling ecosystem or build a more resilient supply chain?
Yeah,
I think the past few months, there's been a lot of uncertainty on the policy side. And I think uncertainty is probably the worst thing right now. It really prevents people from making investments, prevents them from making long-term plans. So from the policy side, again, I would say, no matter what they end up being, I think having them be consistent is very important for industry to be able to move forward.
Yeah, okay, have you respond, Roger?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And in addition, I think, we think about what's going on in the EPR space. Right now, it's sort of state by state. And so it can make it challenging to sort of unify all those requirements, regulations. So I would say coordination should be near the top of the list for policymakers as they look at what they want to institute in their own regions. But understanding the economics of the business is of paramount importance. And so policies that assist those domestic producers and recyclers ought to be what they're focusing on. Certainty obviously does play a big part in all that, but streamlining regulations to lower compliance costs, incentivizing proper activity, those are also very important to consider.
Yeah, I agree, Roger and Ryan, that policymakers is the most critical at this point. But I mean, in the long run, in the kind of longer view, I think communication with customers is very relevant. I mean, recyclers is not kind of trying to be greedy kind of in the industry. I mean, we are trying to build circular economy and closed loop for kind of for the society. So we should not forget that, I mean, kind of we need support from consumers and kind of public kind of to make recycling policies for the policymakers.
Right. I think that's the end of our panel, and wanted to give a few minutes for Q&A right now to the audience.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
This is Aaron. Can you?
Hi, Eric.
Yes. We are lithium-ion recycling in China, and we are the top 3 recycler. So we know that the price of cobalt, nickel, and lithium is not good, and the cost of recycling in US and Europe is higher than China. So will you consider about the export recycled materials to China or Asia?
I think I would say ideally they would be handled domestically. I think the whole point of having a domestic closed loop is that there are lower transportation costs, lower environmental emissions, and a way to keep material closed loop within one geography. So I think in the short term, there may be some material back and forth, but ideally over the long term, each geographic region has its own closed loop.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot
I
more
see.
capacity in Asia right now, so you're going to see that suck up sort of the raw materials in the near term, but longer term, we do expect them to stay, locally, regionally, where those capacities are being built out.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, we will have time for one last question.
Yeah, actually, all of these things that have been discussed today were actually discussed at an event where we had all the industry, including, I'm sure, Ascend and others, many recycling companies were there in September 2023, where all of these things were discussed in one full day, along with the federal, agencies, DOE and Environmental Protection Agency and others were there. So as a result, and this was done under LiBridge, Lithium Bridge, which is the bridge between the industry and the government. And we published a report after that, and we also asked all these questions: what is the most low-hanging fruits and all that stuff. And then in 2024, we had a couple of more interactions to refine that in Canada and also in the US. And SAE came out with or is coming out with a standard, I think, in this month or so, which is basically a battery materials traceability standard, because these discussions really said that the most low-hanging fruit is to really see what we can adapt from the passport, European passport, and use it here. And all of that activity has happened. So I'm just wondering whether there's a disconnect between that activity and whatever is being discussed here. I mean, if there is a disconnect, that means we are, there's a lack of communication. And but we did have about 50 odd companies who are and federal people who are together discussing all of these things and trying to figure out what to do. And I think this month that SAE standard J3327 is being published for the material traceability standard, using best practices from the passport, European passport. So I'm just wondering whether you all are connected with that.
Yeah, we're aware of the work that the SAE is doing on battery traceability. We're part of that standards effort and have contributed to it in the past. I mean, these things do take a long time to come to fruition. It's good that it's coming to a head right now. Obviously, if you go to other places around the world, you might not have as much awareness of what's going on in the U.S. But I think generally the companies here in the U.S. are aware of those.
All right. Yeah.
So that means these things are being addressed. And now, of course, I think the lack of clarity in the last few months because of all the changes that definitely did not help. But some things have been going on in the background, whatever was prioritized and put on the rails. So
yeah, I'm happy to see the final report kind of from the committee or the kind of the conference. So but I mean that does not always kind of make room for the businessman to do business. So maybe kind of we need to kind of work more based on the policy and the data standard, kind of how we can kind of incorporate into our businesses.
yeah, I mean, definitely white papers and all will not solve the problem. And even standards will not solve the problem. There has to be a lot more policy in implementation and stuff like that. Yeah.
Vijay, I think now it's the end of the panel, so we need to move on. Yeah, we can chat later after this. Thank you, Sangjune, Ryan, and Roger for such insightful and wide-range discussion today. And yeah, I think your perspective shed light on the opportunities and challenges ahead of us as we work to build this resilient circular battery recycling ecosystem. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. So I will give back the stage to Michael now.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much.
Just